Chapter 41. Selection. The entire courtyard fell into silence, except for the sound of the Hope's regimental flag fluttering occasionally as the breeze caught it, and the Emperor's band, who was still playing. The Emperor was used to being respected with silence. He had visited regiments of soldiers that were far better trained than those of the Hope. He finished off the latest bunch of grapes that he had pulled from the bucket in virtual silence, and then beckoned the old man over to the side of the palanquin.
Dhati, my old friend,
the Emperor said, his voice still amplified so that everyone in the compound could hear him.
I see there are Harpies in this regiment. I have heard good things about the way Harpies fight. I'd like to see them in action for myself. Arrange something, would you?
Reyes closed his eyes. He could hardly believe he'd heard that correctly. Agnart had warned him of the sort of thing the Emperor liked to do, and still he couldn't believe his ears. Had the Emperor somehow confused the ranks of the Hope for a trip to the city's arena? Reyes opened his eyes again slowly. All he could think of was that they might choose him, and put him up against Gaggara. Dhati's voice also seemed to be amplified as he spoke. "What did you have in mind, my liege?"
The Emperor said. I don't know, nothing too elaborate. Let's pitch 5 of them against 5 of my parish guards.
"Are you sure, my liege?" Dhati definitely sounded as if he wasn't. "We don't want to upset the careful balance here. Harpies are our allies. We don't want to alienate them."
"Do it," the Emperor pressed. These Harpies are in the Hope. They are my soldiers, my slaves. If I wanted to, I could have every last one of them cut down for my delectation and enjoyment."
"I shall do as you say, my liege," Dhati commented doubtfully. He bowed to the Emperor, then turned and slowly approached the ranks of the Hope. His voice continued to be amplified as he addressed the soldiers standing before him. "Okay, I want all the Harpies of the Hope to form a single line in front of the other ranks." Reyes looked hopelessly from side to side. He saw Agnart begin to make her way through the ranks to the front. Nala followed quickly in her wake. Thinking this was probably the worst situation he had been in yet, Reyes followed Nala. He turned his head to check that Gaggara was also following. As Reyes made his way through the lines to the front, he was comforted by the thought that at least he wasn't going to be pitted against a friend. Nevertheless, having to fight and kill an elf for the entertainment of the so-called Dragon Emperor didn't exactly fill him with glee. Slowly, the line formed. As of this morning, there were 37 Harpies in the 421st Hope. Most of them made their way through the crowd much as Reyes had. They would ask those in front to allow them to pass, and then tried to squeeze through the small gaps provided. A few actually took to the air, flying over the heads of the other soldiers. Reyes couldn't help thinking that had to be a very dangerous thing to do. A flying Harpy was far more noticeable than one on the ground. Reyes took his place in the line, standing between Gaggara and Agnart, with Nala again standing just on the other side of Agnart. Reyes chanced a quick look along the line, trying to see where Lagnoff and Limgag had positioned themselves. There was no sign of either of them at first. Then Reyes saw some movement just behind him. Lagnoff had Limgag's hand in her own and was effectively dragging her along. "Would you mind shifting up a bit?" Lagnoff whispered to the girl that was standing next to Gaggara. Reyes recognized her as Riaga, not someone he knew all that well, but he had greeted her on occasion when she was on cooking duty, and vice versa. "I'd like to be next to my daughter." Even when Riaga moved, there wasn't enough room for Lagnoff, let alone both Lagnoff and Limgag. Then the entire line seemed to shift a little, and even Reyes found he had room to move a little bit closer to Agnart. Before too long, Lagnoff had taken her rightful place next to Gaggara, and Limgag had inserted herself in the line next to Lagnoff. As the line continued to form around him, Reyes looked across the grill ground to see what the elves were doing. Dhati had taken a slow, leisurely stroll around the back of the Emperor's palanquin, where he had selected 5 of the archers gathered there. When he returned to the front, the archers followed with him.
The Emperor protested. No archers. I want to watch them fighting hand to hand."
"My liege," Dhati replied respectfully, "Harpies are very strong and quite capable fighters. They will slaughter your soldiers unless you put them up against archers. Skilled archers can work together to keep the Harpies at a distance. If you want to see a slaughter, then make it sword against claw. If you want a balanced fight, you have to use archers against Harpies." For a moment, it looked as if the Emperor was going to order someone to strike down his major advisor, but instead he said,
"Very well, archers versus Harpies, but I'm not happy."
Dhati let out an audible sigh. He shook his head slowly, and then he walked over to the line of Harpies. He seemed to be heading directly towards Reyes. Reyes eyed the Mage Advisor expectantly. It was beginning to look as if his worst fear was about to be played out. Not only was he about to be chosen, but Gaggara was so close that she would almost definitely be amongst those endangered as well. Dragon Man Finette also approached as the mage did. He kept a respectable distance from the Mage Advisor, but the look on his face suggested that he would be only too glad to be rid of 5 Harpies. Wormman Frayne followed close on the Dragon Man's tail, but Reyes was so used to him doing that he barely even noticed he was there. Dhati then addressed Agnot. "And you are?" "Agnot," Agnot replied. For a moment she looked stricken, almost frozen with fear. The mage inclined his head just a little, and then looked at Reyes. "And you?" "Reyes," Reyes all but blurted out. Then he corrected himself. "Tanrag." The mage looked at Reyes for a moment as if considering. Then he asked, "Do you prefer Reyes or Tanrag?" "Tanrag," Reyes replied. The mage nodded, more to himself than anything. "I see you both wear the rank of Chargeman. Why is that? I was under the impression that a regiment of Hope would only have 1 Chargeman per represented race. Yet the 421st has 2 Harpies of that rank." "My lord," Dragonman Finette offered, "this man was promoted to Chargeman against my wishes. I will willingly demote him back to the ranks, if that is your wish." "A male?" Dhati said, surprised. "We don't have many of those outside the villages. What does that remind me of?" Dhati laughed a little to himself. "Tell me, were you a prisoner of the humans about a year ago, and made a daring escape from Castle Demoth before the king could execute you?" "I was." Reyes felt his body shivering uncontrollably. This mage knew who he was. But how? The question stuck in his throat. Reyes had the feeling that it wasn't wise to ask the Mage Advisor of the Emperor any questions. Dhati nodded, and then he seemed to answer the question anyway. "I remember receiving a report about you from one of my spies in Demoth about a year ago. At the time I didn't consider it significant. It's good to finally meet you, Tanrag." "Thank you, my lord." Reyes nodded. He felt trapped. Surely the spy must have reported that he was a member of the Duke's noble family. Maybe the fact that no one seemed to be aware of the Duke having a 4th child would finally pay off for him. "I assume you can speak fluent flourish then?" Dhati asked. "Yes, my lord," Dragonman Finette pitched in. "Tanrag here is my interpreter." "Interpreter?" Wormman Frayne repeated. "Which is why he was made a chargeman," Dhati confirmed, and again he nodded to himself, just slightly. "Against my protests," Dragonman Finette commented. "Protests," Wormman Frayne echoed. "Quite right," Dhati commented. He was looking straight at the Dragon Man as he spoke. "Like me, you are no doubt aware that an interpreter has the right to hold the rank of Drakeman. I can see why you might protest, Tanrag here being given such a weak rank." No, my lord, that's not what I meant," Dragonman Finette said. "I protested that he be given a rank at all. This is a Hope Regiment. I don't need an interpreter." "Interpreter?" Wormman Frayne echoed. Dhati glanced at Wormman Frayne for a moment and then smiled to himself. Wormman Frayne suddenly vanished. Then Dhati reached out a hand, and a parrot, primarily a light brown in colour but with beautiful shiny feathers, landed on his outstretched hand. Dhati let the parrot walk up his arm and perch itself on his shoulder. He seemed to be quite amused. "Second Book of Embra, Canto 9, Line 6, Dragonman Finette said as he eyed the parrot suspiciously. "Line 6, the parrot repeated. "Line 6. "Ah, yes," Dhati commented, "for ye shall not allow the lesser races to think of themselves as your equal. Don't worry, I don't plan to make him my equal." "But my lord," Dragonman Finette protested. My lord, the parrot squawked. "Are you still arguing with me?" Dhati looked menacingly at Dragonman Finette, forcing the commander of the Hope to take a step back. "I suggest you return to your office until this visit is over. Unless you'd like to join your worm man on my shoulder." "My shoulder," the parrot cried. "My shoulder." Dragonman Finette bowed his head slightly towards Dhati as a sign of respect. He then turned to face the Emperor and bowed deeply before bidding a hasty retreat from the drill ground. Reyes couldn't help but feel that the Dragon Man was actually relieved to leave the Emperor's presence. Dhati grinned. He watched the Dragon Man's departure and then turned his attention back to the line of Harpies, and specifically to Reyes. "Tanrag, I hereby promote you to the rank of Drakeman within the armed forces of His Imperial Majesty. Congratulations. Dhati then patted Reyes gently on the shoulder. By holding the rank of drakeman, you do have the right to your own small office within the barracks. However, with the invasion of Florida a mere 6 days away, I'm afraid it will have to wait until this war is over. As a drakeman, you also have the right to eat in the officers' mess with the rest of the officers of the Hope. The Hope, the parrot added. Reyes shivered again. He somehow doubted he'd be happy eating in the officers' mess. Reyes had the strongest feeling that he just wouldn't be welcome there. Although he felt he got on alright with most of the elves in the camp, even the officers, he was sure they would feel differently about him if he were one of them. Yes, quite right, Dhati commented, misinterpreting the shiver. Elves do have a nasty way of enchanting their food. Their food, the parrot echoed. It moved its feet a little to get more comfortable. Reyes resisted the urge to tilt his head to the side, but he couldn't resist the urge to ask, Forgive me, my lord, but are you not an elf? Dhati actually raised a hand to one of his ears. He felt along the length of the ear, finding the point, and touched it. Yes, he said almost with genuine surprise, I do seem to be. At least, I am at the moment. So, Drakeman Tanrag, get your new uniform from the quartermasters once this parade is over. Then he glanced at Agnar again, including her in the next question. In the meantime, is there anyone either of you would like to nominate for this fight? This fight, the parrot screeched. This must have been a tough choice for Agnar. There were a few Harpies among the Hope that Agnar would likely love to see fight and die in the arena. In the end, it came down to the fact that the Harpies might win the fight, and that could prove very awkward for her. No, I'd rather not make any choices. I'm with Agnar, Reyes agreed. I'd rather not pick anyone. Well said, Dhati commented. He looked next at Gaggara, and Reyes felt his heart sink. Dhati placed his hands on either side of Gaggara's belly and exclaimed, You're pregnant. Pregnant, the parrot declared. Pregnant. I am? Gaggara asked. Although she had been told she was by Agnar more than 2 weeks ago, Gaggara still hadn't been all that certain, and after less than a month she still hadn't begun to show. I can't send a pregnant woman into battle. He paused. I know others might, but I wouldn't, Dhati commented. Wouldn't, agreed the parrot. Reyes felt himself let out a sigh of relief. Dhati, the Emperor called, his voice still amplified. Is there any reason for this delay? I want to see some bloodshed. No, my liege, Dhati replied. I was just going through the niceties. I shall pick 5 out for you now. You now, the parrot squawked. You now. Good, the Emperor stated. Get on with it. Dhati performed a quick bow towards the Emperor, and then returned to face the Harpies. Without further delay, he tapped 5 of them on the shoulder in quick succession, starting with the Harpy that had chosen to stand right next to Gaggara, Lagnoff. Reyes saw Gaggara's head drop the second her mother was selected. He had to resist putting an arm around her to comfort her. They were on parade, and not only in full view of the Emperor, but only a few feet from where Dhati was standing. Dhati had also selected Limgag, the one beside her called Ryaga, and 2 others that Reyes had seen around the compound from time to time. They went by the names Betrag and Nida. Reyes had seen them round by the fire pits, and he had spoken to Betrag once on the drill ground. You 5, step forward, Dhati commanded. Step forward, the parrot echoed. Step forward. The 5 Dhati had selected each took a single step forward as ordered. They looked at each other, and at the 5 elven archers lined up on the far side of the drill ground, as if they were weighing up their chances. You 5 have been given the honour of proving the value of Harpies to our beloved Dragon Emperor. I expect you all to do your very best, and to make your race proud. Good luck to you all, Dhati declared. You all, the parrot added. Dhati continued. The elves you will be fighting are archers. I would suggest that you also arm yourselves with bows if you wish to have any chance of surviving. The 5 I have just selected will need to stay here in my sight. I will personally kill any one of you who tries to flee. I suggest you send someone to your barracks to fetch the weapons for them. Get going. I'll give you 5 minutes to be ready. Be ready, the parrot repeated. The Major Advisor nodded slightly to himself, and then walked slowly back over to the Emperor's palanquin. Slowly, the line of Harpies collapsed. Harpies seemed to be heading in all directions, while the 5 selected for the upcoming fight didn't move an inch. Several Harpies headed towards the barracks, cackling in among them, to fetch weapons for those chosen to fight. A few had formed small groups and seemed to be gambling on the outcome of the fight. It was still strange to Reyes how even in a large city like Golspon, Harpies seemed to put more value into worthless pretty-coloured stones than they did elven coinage. Several, Gaggara included, had gathered around the 5 selected combatants. They were trying to lend moral support to the 5, and in some cases even give advice on how they should fight the upcoming battle. Gain as much height as you can, as quickly as you can, Reyes heard someone advise. Once you're out of range of their bows, you can take your time picking them off. Don't be silly, came a reply. That sort of tactic might work in a full-on battle, where you're shooting into a crowd of enemies, but at that height our girls would be lucky to hit anything at all. Reyes felt he could probably offer a little more than just moral support or tactics. He walked casually over to the 5, removing the bracelets from his arms as he did so. When he reached the spot on the drill ground where Lagnoff was talking to Gaggara, he handed them to Lagnoff. Wear these, he said. Lagnoff took the bracelets and looked at them suspiciously. Gaggara smiled broadly and grabbed Reyes in a quick hug. Thank you, handsome. Then she returned her attention to her mother. Trust him, mother. They'll help keep you alive. I remember the Inquisitor and Handsome talking about them. They're magical. You can't miss if you wear these. Just visualize your target, Reyes told Lagnoff, and you'll hit the bullseye every time. Thank you, Tanrag, Lagnoff said. From her tone it sounded very much as if she was struggling to speak. Reyes assumed that she had to be virtually paralyzed with fear as to what was about to happen. She began to put the bracelets on. If I don't survive, I want you to promise me you'll look after Gaggara. You're going to survive, Mother, Gaggara insisted. Promise me, Lagnoff demanded of Reyes. There's nothing to promise, Reyes replied. I love Gaggara. I'll always try to do what's best for her. Lagnoff smiled. She put on the bracelets and tried to move her arms around. It was clear she wasn't used to the extra weight, but Reyes was certain that those bracelets would make all the difference. Reyes glanced quickly and turned to Limgag, Riaga, Betrag, and Nida. He then commented, I just wish I had more things I could offer round. Maybe Lagnoff and I could wear one bracelet each, Limgag suggested. Lagnoff reached for one of the bracelets and looked as if she was about to remove it again, but Reyes held up his hand and told her, I don't think they work that way. I think you need the pair. Limgag shrugged her shoulders. Even now, with her life on the line, she seemed to have quite a bubbly and friendly personality. Reyes could easily see how a girl like that wouldn't get on in village life. She was too nice. The weapons still weren't in evidence when Dhati's amplified voice again permeated the compound. The combatants are going to need a rough area for an arena. I think the drill ground itself would make an ideal killing ground. The rest of you should get clear. Anyone still on the drill ground at the time the battle begins will be considered a viable target. You have 2 minutes. 2 minutes, the parrot screeched, its voice also amplified. I think that birdie's going to lay an egg in a minute, Reyes commented. It's male, Gaggara jibed. Reyes was shocked that Dhati had evidently overheard the comment. Yes, he told the parrot, don't lay an egg. An egg, the parrot reported. Reyes grabbed Gaggara by the arm and started to head off of the drill ground. Gaggara pulled back. She wasn't ready to leave her mother just yet. Reyes let go of her arm and walked slowly to the edge of the drill ground, wishing that he could have done more. He rejoined Agnot and Narloth. There was quite a crowd there now, as creatures of all the races of the Hope gathered at the edge of the makeshift arena, waiting for the spectacle of watching 5 Harpies fight with 5 elves. Now that the 5 who were going to die for the Emperor's entertainment had been selected, there seemed to be a much more relaxed feel about the crowd. Some of them were even chanting. Fortunately, all but a few, regardless of their race, seemed to be cheering for the Harpies. The others were just screaming for bloodshed. Reyes took his place next to Agnot and turned to face the proceedings. He still felt a little nervous. He was right at the edge of the drill ground and the combatants would be using bows. It wouldn't take much for a stray arrow to fly his way. No one else seemed to be worried about this possibility though, so he tried hard to put it out of his mind. A moment later, the Harpies that had gone to fetch the weapons for the 5 combatants placed them in a heap next to the 5. They had brought far more than the 5 weapons they needed, clearly intending to give each of the girls a clear choice on which weapon they selected. Limgag and Nida each selected a short bow with an accompanying quiver of arrows. The other 3 each took a dart thrower with some darts. With the bracelets on her arm, Lagnoff had to tie the quiver of darts to her right leg. The weapons that remained were then collected by the Harpies who had brought them. Gaggara was still there. She nodded sadly at something her mother had just told her. Then she leaned over and kissed her mother gently on the cheek. Gaggara was to be the last to leave. As Gaggara moved to leave, she started looking frantically around. It was clear she was searching for something, and Reyes assumed that it had to be him. He tried to wave to her, but clearly she didn't see him.
Why are there still 6 harpies in the arena? The Emperor suddenly voiced.
His words still amplified so all could hear. I am not sure, my liege, Dhati commented.
My liege, the parrot echoed. My liege.
Well, the Emperor intoned, grabbing some more grapes from the bucket. Reyes had seen him eat so many grapes since he had arrived that the bucket had to be empty by now, and yet there he was pulling yet another bunch from it.
We cannot allow that. If the 6th harpy doesn't leave the arena immediately, send in an extra archer to compensate.
Another shiver ran along Reyes' spine. His legs began to tremble. He suddenly felt very weak. It was bad enough that he might soon lose a good friend such as Lagnoff or even Limgag, but to lose his girlfriend as well? It hardly bore thinking about. Almost immediately Lagnoff pushed Gaggara away, indicating strongly that she should leave the arena. For a moment the volume of the crowd in the compound dropped a level, almost as if they were anticipating something. Reyes was able to barely hear Lagnoff as she said, "Go!" "I can't find Handsome," Gaggara responded, her voice almost lost to what other sounds there were. "Just go," Lagnoff replied forcefully. "Find her later. I love you." Gaggara still hesitated, but then she walked to the edge of the drill ground and stepped out of the arena. She was quite away from Reyes and Agnar, but at least she was safe.
The Emperor said, sounding a little disappointed. Are our archers ready?
They are, my liege, Dhati agreed.
My liege, the parrot echoed. Good, the Emperor said. Then without any pomp or ceremony, he added, Then let the battle commence.